In the year 2020, we have heard the word virus quite a bit. Oops. We've heard the term virus quite a bit. And it's kind of rattled or shaken our whole world. So, what is it? A lot of people think that a virus is something that's alive that can um, jump on you, make you sick, which it does, obviously, but it's not a living thing. So, comparing bacteria and viruses, right? They can both make you sick. They can both be very, very dangerous. However, we have a lots and lots and lots of bacteria inside of our body that's really, really good. All right. And we'll talk more about that at a later unit in the year. So, what do we got here? So, bacteria versus virus. A bacteria is a living thing, right? It has all 8 of those traits that we discussed at the start of this unit that make it a living thing, right? It's prokaryotic, and it can be good or bad. A virus has some qualities of life. A big one is it has DNA. Now, the big thing that a virus does not have, which makes it a non-living thing, is that it cannot reproduce on its own. It needs a host. Basically, it invades a cell, and then it uses that cell to reproduce itself, and then that's how it infects organisms. So let's take a little bit of a closer look at a virus and what exactly we're talking about. I'm going to have to move this video around a lot here. Okay, so a virus is considered parasitic and needs a host organism to reproduce. It can't reproduce on its own. It has to have a host with it. There's a lot of different structures on it. Now this screen, I'm just going to go out. I'm just going to tell you, I'm not real worried if you know this screen a whole lot. Okay, but I'm going to go over what these things mean. So a lot of different structures of viruses. There's this thing called a capsid on the outside of a virus. They have this capsid that basically protects it. It's a protein coat around it, kind of like a little armory for it. Basically, this capsid or these cells in the capsid kind of trick the host cell, into taking it in and then using its genetic information, like its DNA or RNA, in order to reproduce. And every virus is pretty specific for the things that they infect. Now, this coronavirus, which we've heard tons and tons and tons throughout the whole year, is an animal virus, right? It has made it. Now, the big thing with the coronavirus is it basically jumps species, which these things do have an opportunity to evolve. Then there's a virus called a bacteriophage down there at the bottom. You can see these are viruses that infect only bacteria. So you can see a couple of pictures. Whoops, let me go back here. A couple of pictures of what these viruses look like. On the top, this one here is a bacteriophage. You've probably seen a lot of pictures of coronavirus that look like this. That's kind of what this coronavirus is looking like. All right. You see the surface proteins on it. Those allow it to trick its host cell. So this thing basically goes inside of a cell and then uses the cell's DNA to basically make other copies of viruses. And then eventually that virus is going to cause the cell to become sick or die. So virus reproduction, how does it happen? Well, 2 ways they happen: lytic cycle and lysogenic cycle. The lytic cycle is when a virus is made and went up within the host. It will then burst, okay, because bunches and bunches and thousands of viruses are getting made inside the cell. It's kind of like if you filled a water balloon up too much, right? If I put too many viruses inside the cell, basically cause it to pop. All right, that's called lysing, Lysing, or lysis. Makes cell sick, destroys the cell. All right, and this happens really, really quickly. All right, the common cold, that's the next slide, but the common cold is caused by the lytic cycle. Once those viruses are out of the cell, they can then go find more cells to do the same thing too. So it's pretty dangerous. The lysogenic cycle, basically, it's kind of the same thing. They're going in, they're using the host cell's DNA to make other copies, but it takes a long time for it to happen. Basically, they can sit in there. They call it lying dormant. And this could take years and years and years before you really know that you've been infected by this virus. If you've heard of the term or the disease HIV, which leads to AIDS, that's caused by the lysogenic cycle. So here you go. Lytic cycle, we have a virus that's attached to the cell. It then goes inside, puts its DNA. You see that not necessarily the whole virus goes inside there, but it puts its DNA inside the cell. And then it uses the cell's DNA to replicate or create more and more DNA and more viruses. Now I'm getting a bunch of viruses, and what happens? Well, they basically burst the cell open. Okay. The lysogenic cycle takes a long time. DNA goes in, and we're going to use the cell's DNA to kind of make more and more copies of that DNA within the cells. And then eventually, after many generations, well, now the lytic cycle kind of takes over again, and we'll see that lysine or the cells bursting. What are some examples? Well, I got a couple examples here. You have the common cold. Common cold is formed by the lytic cycle. After infection, the host is affected within 8 hours. Okay, so common cold happens pretty quick. HIV or lysogenic cycle. HIV is caused by the lysogenic cycle. How do you treat it? People always say, "Yay, use some antibiotics." Well, an antibiotic is not going to work because an antibiotic's for a bacteria. So you could take as many antibiotics as you want, but it will not affect the virus. So they have to have antiviral drugs and vaccines. With the current state of what's happening in the world right now, we are hoping that a vaccine is going to be made for this virus. But some viruses that we do have, a vaccine for would be like chickenpox. Okay. There is a video here. I'm going to put this onto your HyperDoc so you can watch it without having to go into this PowerPoint.